It's time again to recap the latest news from the solar PV industry compiled by the American Solar Energy Society. I'm Jay Warmke with SolarPVTraining.com, and this is what's happening in the world of solar for the week of June 9th. Well, one of the goals of the Inflation Reduction Act was to stimulate the growth of the solar manufacturing industry, and that appears to be working. In the first quarter of this year, over 11 gigawatts of new manufacturing capacity was added here in the U.S., bringing the total of installed manufacturing capacity to 27 gigawatts annually of output. Now in 2023, the U.S. solar industry installed about 40 gigawatts of new generating capacity. So basically what that means is that the entire U.S. manufacturing capacity for solar will supply about 2/3 of the domestic demand, if it all worked that way, which it doesn't. But as you can see, it's starting to grow. Solar accounted last year for about 75% of all of the new generating capacity connected to the U.S. grid. Investment in clean energy is skyrocketing. It jumped 40% quarter over quarter this first quarter of 2024. Businesses spent more than $71 billion in Q1, first quarter of this year. That's up from $51 billion a year ago. Now, while the investment in wind energy actually fell 32%, more money was invested in solar PV than all other forms of energy combined. Now, worldwide investments in all forms of energy are expected to top $3 trillion this year, with about 2/3 of that going towards clean energy. A new study by Lawrence Berkeley National Labs has found that the health benefits of the transition to wind and solar may be much greater than originally projected. The study found that from 2019 to 2022, wind and solar provided $249 billion in climate and air quality health benefits. Now that amounts to about 14.3 cents per kilowatt hour generated through wind and about 10 cents per kilowatt hour for all energy generated through solar. Now, researchers relied on studies published in the science journal Nature as the basis for determining health costs that are associated with carbon emissions. They speculate that in 2022 alone, wind and solar energy prevented 1,200 to 1,600 premature deaths in the U.S. that otherwise would have occurred had the energy been generated through fossil fuels. And the next time your anti-solar uncle starts predicting that aging solar panels are going to start filling up landfills in about 20 years, well, you may want to point him to a recent ruling by the EPA denying Alabama's request to continue to allow utilities to store toxic coal ash in unlined pits. Now, in 2015, the EPA adopted new coal ash rules that outlined the safe disposal requirements for coal ash. But in 2019, a report by the Environmental Integrity Project found that the EPA's rules were largely being ignored. 91% of the coal power plants were found not to be complying, and they were continuing to store this coal ash, which contains toxic chemicals such as arsenic, lead, mercury, selenium, and cadmium. These were being stored in unlined pits near the utility generating facilities. Now, these leach into the groundwater or nearby streams and rivers. And we're talking about a lot of waste here. Coal ash remains one of the nation's largest industrial waste products, generating about 110 million tons of waste annually. The Biden administration began to concentrate its effort to enforce these rulings in January of 2022, after the previous administration had spent years attempting to relax or eliminate the requirements altogether. And the birthplace of Thomas Edison recently went solar. Now, Edison is famously quoted as telling Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone back in 1931, He said, quote, "I put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that." Well, only 93 years later, donations from solar installers and solar manufacturers have resulted in the birthplace of Thomas Edison, which is located in Milan, Ohio, converting over to solar energy. And that is the news from the solar industry for this week. We'll see you next week.